something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Salutations, New Haven. Salutations, Connecticut. Salutations to the world. This is 103 FMW NHH, bringing you the Truth to Power Hour with Dr. Turner. And I have a special guest today who I have known since 2012. We met at a Save Our Schools conference. We were just refreshing ourselves before the start of the show. And we were having intense conversations around education, around school reform, around special education. But Dr. Nancy Bailey is my go-to on special education. I am one of the followers of her blog, and I hope you will be too. And so I want to get us right into the show. So I want listeners to feel engaged. You can type in a question in the chat box. We will do our best to answer it. But Dr. Bailey, and for the sake of the show, you can call me Jesse, and I'll call you Nancy if that's fine.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, we'll get rid of the formalities, and I'd like to begin with. Could you tell us who you are, and then follow up with what your passion is?
Okay, well, I started my teaching career in 1975 when the All Handicapped Children's Act was signed into law. And so I've kind of been there from the start. And I started out teaching students who had emotional and behavioral disorders. Back then, there was a great deal of hope surrounding special education. It was a tremendous law at the time to say that our public schools would be open to all children, no matter their disabilities, that we would work with them. And that was much different than had been in the past. And so the All Handicapped Children Act really opened doors for children with disabilities at that time. There was a flurry of activity. Colleges were redefining what they would teach their teachers. We had special categories. I studied at Central Michigan University. It was not a big school, but a great school when it came to special ed. I learned about teaching students who had emotional and behavioral problems, and I got a minor in elementary education. And then I had student teaching, which complemented what I learned in college. I worked in a psychiatric residential center for children. And then I also student taught in an elementary school for third graders. And it was such a different time. We had the support of people, it seemed. I know there were those who did not agree with serving all children. When they signed this bill into law, there was not a Rose Garden ceremony because there were a lot of politicians that didn't think it could be funded well, and it never has been funded well. But I think it could be, and it should have been, and it should have improved over the years. But at that time, there was a segment of the population. There were great people who were working in special ed. Samuel Kurt, Burton Blatt. Burton Blatt went into institutions and showed some of the abysmal situations there. And parents today might not remember that before we had this act, there were many children that would just have institutionalization. They didn't have schools to go to. The doors weren't open to them. And that all changed. And with that law, I went on to work for a while with children who had severe developmental and cognitive disabilities. We were a public school program that worked in an institution in Tallahassee. It was one of its kind. We worked on feeding programs, life skills of all kinds. We worked with children with physical therapy, potty programs, you name it. We were helping our children have a better quality of life. And at that time, we had school board members that would come into our program to see what we were teaching. We had legislators, I'm sure, who walked through. They were curious about what we were doing, but they were also supportive. And it was a different kind of climate when it came to services for children. I don't know how we've lost that, but we have over the years. There's been a push, a greedy push to make money on these programs, a greedy push to dissolve some of them. After working in this institution, I went to work on what I studied in my master's program to become to understand kids with learning disabilities, especially with reading disorders. I started out in an all-black school, and the community was rezoned where they brought in a wealthier part of the neighborhood, and parents worked. There were parents there that tried very hard to make all of that work. It was just a phenomenal kind of experience to see people coming together. And yet the school facility had a lot of problems. I had problems getting a classroom. My students were housed in a portable out behind the band room. The special ed had a lot of work to do. We had a lot of hills to climb to get students the right kinds of services and to get schools to accept these kids, not to have them in portables out behind the school. But to see how teachers, and everywhere I worked with fantastic teachers. Some of them were trailblazers that went on to do really great things in special education. And so it was just such a great time in some ways to see these changes occur. But then, you started to see disintegration of the offerings that we would do in special ed. In 1998 and in 2004, the All Handicapped Children Act was reauthorized to the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's a better name, I would say, more updated name. But what that did was really push a lot of kids into general classes. It made the continuum of services that we had, it made that look like it wasn't necessary or that it wasn't the best approach for kids. It really cut the services, however. It cut, I think, also funding for those programs. And so we have a lot of kids now that are inclusion. However, when you look at charter schools, a lot of those schools don't accept kids with special needs. And when they do, they don't have inclusion. They're just charter schools that are special ed schools. So times have changed, and I think not for the better, unfortunately. And I think right now we really are in danger with losing the United States Department of Education, or the U.S. Ed Department, which is in charge of the mandate, the special education mandate, IDEA now, which provides the protections for children. And I fear that we really are going to step backwards in time now and not provide the services that our students so desperately need. So I'm going on. I need to take a break.
I think from this we can already tell your passion. It's special education. It's reaching the children of people have forgotten. And when I'm 70 this year, so I remember a time where special education children had to be physically and deeply emotionally with difficulties and would be sent to a school somewhere on buses. In my town, they were the only children who went on buses. We always wanted to go on the buses, but we couldn't get on the buses. But coming back to in our schools, we have to remember before 1974, even before IDEA, there was nothing. So if I was in a classroom, so I remember I'm a child of a pretty poor community, an urban poor community. And I remember teachers, and it's not only just special education. My elementary teachers, what they would do, so if you were a new child, bilingual child, they put you in a corner, in a desk in a corner. If you're a special education child, the same thing. Now imagine being a special education child and being put in the corner and almost not taught to. You taught to the middle. That's what people would say, the middle, that group before you. But I remember that, and we should remember that. And if we looked at the retention rates of special education children, a majority left school before graduation dates, dropped out of school over there. So it's just I know what came before, and if we've been around long enough,
Right.
say we know what's coming. And so you talked a little bit about what would happen if the United States Department of Education would disappear. And so I think we should talk about that again. What exactly is at risk for the parents of special education children and schools and teachers, because the learning conditions of our children are the working conditions of our teachers. So this what would happen if we eliminated that United States Department of Education?
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. And exactly the huge fear that I think a lot of parents and a lot of teachers have right now, teachers who work with exceptional ed. Um, you know, um, Messing with the law like this, and I know there have been some parents who have said, well, it'll be better in the states. The states they'll do better when you pass that law down. And also some of these parents don't remember. They're not as old as the two of us, and they don't remember those early years and what happened, but they sort of have a lot of faith in their state. And I just like to mention, and I've written about this several times to try to remind people that in the state of Texas, this happened in 2004, they decided to put a cap on the numbers of kids in special ed that could have special ed services. They put a cap of 8.5%. This was totally illegal, okay? Nobody called them on it. And that went on for 12 years. Now, this was during the George W. Bush. It started with the George W. Bush administration, a Texan. It started with Margaret Spellings, a Texan, I believe, who was the education secretary. And to me, that's what the U.S. Department of Ed should have been on that right away. They should have noticed that mistake right away. You audit states. That is the purpose of this law, to make sure that states are held accountable in providing children the services. And states also hold the local districts accountable for providing the services for kids. And so Texas went for 12 whole years, a school span for a child with disabilities who likely didn't get services. And then there was an article, and I believe it was the Texas Tribune. There was a reporter who caught up on this, who reported on it. And then there was this lawsuit and a big flurry, and they were going to change it all. They're going to make it better. And there's still problems there. Now, do you think Texas, when they get a block grant from the federal department to do whatever the heck they want to do with their program, do you think they're going to have the good idea to continue with special ed in that state? I worry about that. I mean, I think what's going to happen, Jesse, is that there will be some states who have really good governors. There will be the Kentucky Andy Beshear, or Minnesota's governor Tim Walz. There'll be some governors who will care enough about special ed that they will push their legislation to keep it in their states. But I think it's kind of hit and miss, and I think parents don't realize that states don't have to follow the mandate. They can change. And I was looking over some of the states and how there have been changes in special education and some of the problems they're facing. And the problems are enormous, really. But New Mexico, for example, they were given a lot of money for special ed a year ago, and but yet they're kind of a poor state, so their schools were sort of underfunded. So the report was that they used that money for special ed for some other things. So teachers were held accountable for making changes with these kids because they got so much money. You always hear some people say, "Oh, there's so much money," and that they haven't improved on the test scores though, because money doesn't matter. Well, they use the money for other things. They really didn't get that money to go towards special ed. And I'm afraid that's probably what's going to happen. Maybe not right away, but I think eventually states will use those block grants for anything, and that children, especially special ed kids, will wind up in substandard charter schools. And they won't be charter schools that include inclusion, which parents demand in public schools today. They won't have inclusion in a lot of those charter schools. They will be charter schools for kids with dyslexia, charter schools with kids with X problem or X problem, but they won't probably be charter schools that will include kids who aren't disabled being with the kids who are. There won't be that integration that parents want so much in public schools. So I think there are going to be grave changes with what's going on, and we'll see, but it's very scary, I think.
Definitely scary. I'm one of the people that remind our public that the U.S. annually spends $23 billion more every year on predominantly white, wealthy schools than we do on poor schools of color and poor rural schools in this nation. That money matters. We spend nearly $2 billion on standardized testing, and that the results come back into the kids are in the next grade. So the money, I remind my parents and my colleagues, I'd say, there's 53 million children in our schools. Think about the profits from 53 million pencils, 53 reams of paper and notebooks and Chromebooks and all that. It's a massive piggy bank. In New Jersey, there's a book that was written by Dale Resenhoff, a journalist, and it was all about Mark Zuckerberg giving nearly $1 billion. Cory Booker was the mayor at the time.
I remember that, yes.
Yeah, and Mayor Christie was, he was the governor at the time. And the money went to all kinds of places, but to the classrooms where it really mattered. And in that line, and I'm from New Jersey, so, and many years I worked political campaigns as a young college student, and we understood something, that mayors, that the prize, we used to call it the prize, and the reason that Dale Russell's book is called The Prize is that the city of Newark had an education budget of $1 billion. So Congressman Rizzo became mayor. He wanted control of 5,000 jobs and that budget. That's why when people ask him, well, isn't it a step down from congressman to mayor? That kind of comes up. And he said, no, there's a prize in Newark. And so that stuff, that's one. And money is at the key of this. And we use so much money, it goes to places that it's not supposed to go. We know that. But I want to come back to, I want to help educate our parents. And maybe we can have a conversation. My parents now used to come with an IEP, and then all of a sudden they came with 504s and all the effort, all the promise, because we are talking about a promise here, that we will help you. We will identify the needs of your child, your education disability. We'll identify them. We're going to get you services. We had it with the IEPs, and we had it with the 504s. Is there a difference between those two?
Well, I think, 504s, that's in trouble too. I with the DOE being dismantled, that's in trouble too. But it's a lesser thing, I guess, than, kids get services, but not on the same level as being identified with an IEP and a special ed kind of category. But let me just mention the IEPs. I think these people that are dismantling special ed. I was reading where Lindsay Burke, who wrote, I'm glad you mentioned IEPs. She was a person who was a policy director for the Conservative Heritage Foundation, who wrote, of course, Project 2025. And she was interviewed, I guess it was USA Today, and I saw this, I believe I saw it in Education Week, but she said that the Project 2025 did not touch IEPs at all and won't prevent school districts from maintaining them. And this is such, and this woman she's a fellow with Ed Choice, was on the foundation with the Milton and Rose Friedman Foundation. She works on an advisory board, Learn for Life, which is it's kind of like XQ Super Schools. It's to redo public charter schools and for high school, change high schools around, I think, to focus more on the workforce. And she's, but the point is, there's such a disconnect to think that schools and IEPs are so involved and they're so critical, but they're really they're hard for teachers. I mean, there's so much paperwork involved with them, and principals have to give teachers time out so that they can make sure it's a legal binding contract to have parents come in to listen to what your plan is for your child. And do you think with these changes that teachers are going to have to do IEPs if there's no mandate from the top? Are they going to have to do IEPs anymore? I think people are kind of, including Lindsay Burke, if she thinks that they're going to continue to do IEPs, if there's no accountability set forth with IDEA from the top, I think parents are going to be very shocked and dismayed to find out that they're maybe not even going to get IEPs. Who's going to be making them do that? There's no laws from the top anymore. And so I think that there could be some very challenging problems in the future. And really, with the dismantling of USDOE, that money, I think they really want to go towards vouchers. And so you're going to see less money going to public schools. We already see that, and more money going towards vouchers. And for kids with special needs, like I said before, I think that will mean substandard charter schools, probably cyber schools, where they sit in front of screens and have somebody making them sit still, but not teachers. It's, I think I think we're in a very scary time right now. And I don't think people realize that when you break up the laws that provided the protections for children, that people don't have to be held accountable anymore, and the state doesn't, and the state won't have to make the local school district be accountable either. And when you look also at all the nonprofits that are out there, Jesse, you've probably noticed this too. There are nonprofits galore with people, and I mentioned Connecticut because I was looking at different states. In Connecticut, if you get the Chat GPT, they say really good things about Connecticut and their school district. But if you look behind the scenes, there was this report about special ed and how that special ed isn't doing really well, that the education department has significant concerns, especially with Hartford's special education. So I was looking into this, and they said the review was conducted by New Solutions K-12. And I thought, who are these people? New Solutions K-12. And why are they going into the schools and determining how schools are doing with special ed? When I was working on my PhD at FSU, I got to intern at the Florida Department of Education, the Bureau for Exceptional Ed. And they had their consultants who had been teachers, who had worked in schools, who had worked in different areas of special ed, and they were working now at the State Department, and they would go on audits. And we went on an audit trip to Jacksonville. I got to go on an audit trip with them to Jacksonville, and they would interview teachers. How is it going with special ed? What kinds of things do you need? Are you getting the resources that you need for these kids? What are you doing? They would work with principals. Are you getting the support you need in your school? They would talk to the superintendent. They would do surveys. They were there to go into the schools to do this kind of evaluation. Now you have New Solutions K-12 going to the state and telling them what they're missing. I don't understand this. I look at New Solutions K-12. Who are these people? Well, the people who are involved with New Solutions K-12, one of them was from the Eli Broad Superintendency. Do you remember Eli Broad, Jesse?
Yes, we remember. Anyone can be a superintendent. We'll get around those certifications.
Right. So it's a person there. The other person worked for the charter school industry. Most of the people that work in this nonprofit are from the charter school industry. And it is appalling to me that people who most of them never worked with kids, never worked in special ed. They might have worked with children, but not in special ed. And now they're the people in charge of deciding what's working, what's not working, how much money is going where, what's happening, and how much money. I was trying to find out their funders and how much money they make. I couldn't find that. But they're just a drop in the bucket. There are nonprofits like this everywhere that are getting money. And there are also reading programs. You know that. All the different science of reading programs. We don't know what's science about their program, and we don't know how good they are because they're not really vetted. But all of these programs make so much money from the public school funding that should be going to public school, should be going to teachers. And it's just not.
$200 billion. $200 billion. This is a lot. But what happens is where the money goes. And so there's a simple way of looking at equity in my view. That's why don't we give poor communities the same class size ratios
Exactly.
that others? Why don't we give poor communities teachers' aides? Why don't we help hire more special education teachers? More
give them the arts. Give
right,
them the
arts, the music. Let's do all of that. But what happens is we've expanded the amount of money, but less of the money goes to where the child sits in the classroom. And that's the trick here. And that's the trick in Newark when Mayor Russo called his schools the prize because he had $1 billion education budget. Political leaders, not all, but some are very cognizant that if I have 5,000 jobs, well, I can get 5,000 people to vote for me. They could depend on me. They can contribute to my campaign. The contracts I give out can get people to contribute to my campaign, can give jobs to my friends and my family and things like that. So it's almost, it's not to get conspiracy, but we should be spending the money closest to the child. And you mentioned all the things that teachers have to do to fill out the dots in the bus, spending all day entering data in power schools and others. We do that in Connecticut. It's no different than anywhere else. And not doing the things they need to do right for that child because the administration is pushing it on their backs to get the data in. And I always say it's the data that really doesn't matter. The data that really matters, I should be able to look at the children in my classroom. I should be able to see when they're learning by light bulbs going off on their smiles. I should be seeing if they're paying attention. There's this data, kid watching, Yetta Goodman called it. And the kid watching data has been cast aside, but I want to come back to this piece and IEPs are about accommodations and 504s label your child as disabled but really, if we eliminate the Department of Education, in my view, and I've been one of those people who have occupied the Department of Education with United Opt-out.
Well, I agree, yes.
And I've done that, but to eliminate them, see, when I have a problem, when we want to file a class action suit from a state, when a state is not doing right, and I'm an old civil rights advocate, the last thing you want to do is give the states the final say, because if you're black or brown and you want to vote in Louisiana, you can't
Mm-hmm.
trust Louisiana to do right by you. So all of this stuff frightens me. But I want to get back to, if this Department of Education is eliminated, who, and I know we say the states, you said some parents will say the states, but do you believe the states, or I don't know, these non-profit agencies, will they really come to the defense? Will they stand up to political leaders who are denying the accommodations that our special education children not only need, but deserve? Do you think,
Well,
who would we look to?
Well, one thing, I've noticed, and I think, with special ed, I think there has really been an underlying force for many years, maybe even since the beginning, of people who do not want to educate the kids who have special needs. I had a chilling comment on a blog post I did about Project 2025. I just got the comment a couple days ago, and the post I wrote was from a year ago. This person said, I think in special ed, we should just work with the kids with mild disabilities. We shouldn't work with the kids who just sit around and drool and won't learn. And it just turned my stomach because, as I told you, I worked for a while, for 2 years, with kids with developmental disabilities. And yes, they may not go into the workforce. They may not work for Amazon or Google, but they had a better quality of life because we worked with them, and they were able to perhaps even walk, do the kinds of things that they needed to do to communicate. So yes, you should serve every single child. That is where America has a moral compass. That's who we should be. We aren't like that anymore, though, I'm afraid. We're going away. We're becoming, I mean, look at what we're doing with the immigrants. I mean, it's just so frightening how we're looking at people today. And with special ed, I think there has been this force to really get rid of it, and they'll say things that are so ridiculous. Betsy DeVos, at one point in time, and I probably don't have the words right, but she said something to the effect of, we can't really fund special education, so we really need to get rid of it, And, you know, and I did this chapter for a book called Innovative School Reforms. It's a kind of an obscure book, but the editor is William Pinkney from Marquette University, and it's a chapter about special ed. And I looked into what teachers are doing, and it's really scary that a lot of universities have reduced the number of special ed professors to teach teachers at a time when we have a rising level of kids who seem to have disabilities in our schools. Now, I could argue with reading that we're pushing our kids to read too much, and that we maybe don't have so many kids that have dyslexia. They're just being pushed to read too early. And we can argue about things like that, but it's scary to me that we're not going to have special ed teachers that are really well prepared. So not only that, we have a lot of problems with just getting teachers who are well prepared now. We've got a lot of fast track teachers. So what is education going to look like if we give the responsibility to charter schools? Charter schools are really, even if it's a nonprofit charter school, they're there to make money. They're not really always focused on children. So we've got a problem, I think, in general with education, let alone working with the kids who are maybe the neediest, the poorest kids, as you have said, the kids with the disabilities, the kids in poor rural areas, the kids in poor urban areas. Those kids have missed out on services in like the arts for many years. How many great artists did we lose because they weren't given the opportunity to express themselves in schools? How many kids dropped out of school because they didn't really have anything that they were interested in school, and that they were too focused on standardized tests, and they didn't do well on tests, and so they, didn't feel good about school and they dropped out. I mean, I think that we've just come to kind of an era where the greed and the push for school privatization has reached its tentacles all over public education, where we're not going to have public education anymore. And that is really frightening. Um, Linda McMahon, they have a real agenda, and the agenda is all caught up in technology, pushing kids into CTE much too early. And you talk about data. In Virginia, the person who's the head of education is from the Data Quality Campaign. They want to collect data on kids. That's their big thing, and that's not going away anytime soon. Data is like gold to these people, and so it's truly frightening. I don't know what's going to change it. I don't know if we get a better president in office in 4 years, if that person will have the will to get back the laws that we're going to lose. I don't know if that's even possible. It's just very a time of great uncertainty. Throw in AI, and that's really scary. So, it's just I think, very dark time for us in history. And you got to have hope that somehow it'll turn around. But, and I think you and I are both optimistic people, Jesse. So I'm hoping for a good next president, that we're going to somehow have to turn everything around with somebody who really cares about people again, and puts aside the private interests, and maybe make some changes to the campaign finance report so that we don't have really wealthy people influencing our politics like they're able to do right now. I think that's really the big problem educators are up against.
You've got it. I look at lots of the Chromebooks, the texts, and all the screen addictions, the intervention programs becoming. I've got a reading program. You're going to sit in front of a computer. One person's in the room, and 12 kids are in there.
Right.
Robert Codall and I are working on an article and a show about disappearing libraries. I don't want to get into that now, but one of the things we noticed, the redesigning used to be how many districts we have. Now, all of a sudden, Connecticut is talking about entities, and we went from 160 districts to 1,400. And we started looking, what is a school entity? And it could be as little as a computer program with 10 kids somewhere, and we'll call it that. But I want to come back to something, because we've got to give the hope, and I see a lot of hope. And I tell people, we're the sand in the gears of a machine that wants to reduce our children to profits and numbers. So some states are doing good. Can you tell us some of those states we might look at? Maybe one of them that we might look to. I think you alluded to two of them before. Maybe you mentioned Minnesota, maybe Kentucky. I forget. But
well, I really like those two governors. I think I guess if I look to the future for presidential candidate at this point in time, I'm kind of looking at Governor Andy Beshear, because he's in a Republican state. And I think that he has talked a lot about education in a very kind and caring way. And I think Kentucky, in a lot of ways, has had a pretty good education program. I don't think they've had charters. I think they voted. They were one of the states that voted against charter school, or not. I'm sorry. Charters and vouchers. I think they voted against vouchers this last presidential election. So I think any state, and also Tim Walz, I think, he did such a great job in getting school lunches for kids. Those are the kinds of compassionate things that sometimes fly under the radar screen, but are so important for kids. But to focus on, like you mentioned school libraries. Those are certainly important. All these things are important to kids. Kids with reading disabilities need school libraries. They need to learn that reading's fun. And one of the most difficult things for me teaching reading was to get kids motivated. They were sick of phonics. They were sick of all these programs where they drilled, sitting down and reading with them Scholastic Scope magazines with topics of interest were what really captured their attention. And so there's such a discussion for reading that goes beyond all this stuff that's going on right now for helping schools, helping poor schools, and having school libraries is certainly very important. But I would like to see teachers get better university education programs. And, in Virginia, another point I want to make about how we say special ed doesn't have, and so we need to get rid of it. They recently said that the early childhood education teachers, there weren't enough of them. There's not enough of them. And this is a great problem in a lot of the states, that there aren't enough teachers, not enough qualified teachers. So in Virginia, they said, well, we don't have enough qualified teachers for early childhood education. So we'll lower the qualifications. We'll get rid of the master's degrees, and we'll get, and that's exactly, instead of that, it would be nice if you'd see states provide scholarships to young people coming out of high school who want to be teachers for college. It would be nice if they'd lower the cost of college so that young people, and make teacher salaries reflect upon the jobs that they do, improve the salaries, and just make teaching great again. But as far as hope, I do see, some states that might happen. I do fear that I hope that we can get back what we're losing. I do, though, have some hope with parents. I think parents understand when their kids aren't getting the programs they need, and there might be a real push with special ed parents when they start seeing that programs are being denied kids in their communities. And I'll tell you, that's a common issue with Republican parents, too. I have Republican parents in Texas who care very deeply about public schools. You can say that Democrats and Republicans have both been on board for privatization of public schools, but you can say, too, that there are Republican and Democratic parents who want public schools. They want good quality public schools for their kids, and they want special ed, too. They want good special ed programs for children. So, so there's maybe hope in the American people to wake up and see that these programs that we're going to lose are really necessary, and losing them will be a horrible thing for the country in the long run.
Yeah, and it's if parents understood that they have the power.
Exactly.
Like I said, the ballot or the bullet. Well, parents, you are the ballot. You can decide. You can decide who stays and who goes in our local legislators, our boards of ed, our governor's mansions, and our congressmen and our Senate and our White House. The parents really hold the key. While I said, what would happen if the Department of Education disappeared? Well, I would be worried that we weaken the protections. But now, when this threat comes up, this is the time for parents to step up. And like you, it doesn't matter what political party, whether they live in a red or a blue state, the parents with special education children are always advocating for their child, always fighting for their child. Now it's sort of like saying the hope is at the ballot box. Push them, and it's one of those things. So in Connecticut is a state that spends billions of dollars on any kind of education reform gimmick there is. We go with that, and in the meantime, Brennan Rogers, a small elementary school in a predominantly Black and brown community in New Haven, just for $3 million was closed down. And we spent more than that on signing a new contract with a custodial company, a private custodial company, who the district was not satisfied with. But also the money we spent on the science of reading, the money we spent on that NGO foundation that's find the solution. So I would say the hope is on parents who are aware and smart enough to say, where is that money that you've allocated? Don't tell us where it's going. Tell us where in the classroom it is going. So this is the stuff that we need. If there's a teacher shortage, yes, give them scholarships, pay for them. Special education in Connecticut has become a really tough sell because everybody is an alternate route. And that means I am given 2 years with a possible extension. So I'm given 2 to 3 years to teach special education. And I can start without having taken one special education course. So it's imagine a heart surgeon who we start hiring. Oh, you're going to make transplants. You're going to do that. But I know you're going to take classes down the road and you're going to learn as you go. Could you operate on me? And I'd be like, no. So this is the stuff that parents, I do believe that our voters have to become wiser. And that's what my show is all about. The truth to power is I'm just a little clog in a big machine, but truth has a way of changing the world. So we're educating them. So tell us about, because time will start running out, in about another 5 or 6 minutes. What would be a perfect special education world in our public schools? And I know that's not an easy answer, but give us a couple of things, what that might look like, because I need things to fight for.
Well, I think the way we started out, in a way, was good. It wasn't perfect, but I think a continuum of services where parents are able to choose how their kids would be educated. I think parents have kind of been convinced that a smaller class size or a self-contained class or a resource class isn't the best thing, that they need inclusion with the kids. But, to have general classes, I think if any teacher has inclusion, they should definitely have a smaller class size so that they can reach kids, and where you can have maybe team teachers, have special ed teachers working with general ed teachers. Resource classes to take kids who have reading difficulties, work with them, get them back into the classroom as quickly as possible, but to identify their difficulties and to remediate those. And I think having really well-rounded reading programs, I think we used to do that. When I was student teaching in this little 3rd grade class in a kind of a poor school outside of Detroit, the 3rd grade teachers would get together. They would identify the skills that kids needed. They would put them in skill groups, not high groups or low groups, but skill groups. They'd work on a skill together. They didn't know if they were high or low. They'd move to another skill. And that's the way they learned the skills. And then they'd have a rich literature program where the kids learned how wonderful it was to learn how to read in a good school library. And teachers, it was a poor school, but they had resources that teachers shared. We need good teacher ed programs and just really wonderful. I'd like to see teachers again focus on some of the disability areas instead of getting that all thrown in one general pot. But I think just recognizing how critical it is to open the doors still for all children to get the best education we can possibly offer, and to also vet, I think, the resources, because I'm very worried that with reading, we're using there's a lot of pressure with the science of reading just for these commercial programs, and a lot of them are online. And I think we need better vetting of these programs. We need better professionals in teaching and special education, who have really studied the children and the program and what it is you're teaching. I think that's been kind of messed up throughout the years. And believe me, I don't think the Department of Education has always been terrific. They've bought into Common Core. They had people from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation working there for a while. I mean, you had privatization really involved, and that's made a lot of parents upset and anti that department. I get that. But I do think the laws that we have from Title IX to helping kids get to college, to Title I, to IDEA, all of those are very, very important. We should strengthen that and strengthen the accountability that we get states to do and local school districts. So I think that would help special education
So,
mightily.
all right. So we'll look at it. If we were to eliminate the Department of Education, we would have chaos. There would be
I think so.
anything goes anywhere. We would have no final place to go. The White House could not protect their children. The Congress, the Senate couldn't, although they would fund 10% of the education budget. They would have really no control and chaos. I remind people.
I think it would be chaos.
It would be chaos, and chaos makes money. Coming from the old political background I have, nothing is better than a crisis to appoint new emergency budgets, programs, and projects that you don't have to go through the vetting system. There's nothing better if I'm a politician than those kinds. So chaos makes money. So we've got that. So I say, I want people to fight for the Department of Education, the United States Department of Education. I definitely want them to fight to keep it. Not that it's the best, but there's nothing left once that's gone. So I worry about that. But I also want the public. I want teachers, teacher unions. I see a lot of power in the NEA and the AFT. If you join together, 5.5 million votes, you could create the biggest funding increase to our public schools, to helping teachers have the resources and the funds they have. I mean, they could do that. I see a lot of hope in them, and I often think they get sidetracked by trivia things. So maybe it's AI, maybe it's reading, whatever.
Yeah.
It should be fighting to improve the working conditions and the learning conditions of students. I see hope in the Chicago Teachers Union.
Chicago, yes.
Yes, I saw lots of hope in Karen Lewis. I continue to see hope. And I also see hope in these young people, these young parents who are emerging. They're not linked, so rooted in political parties and the whatever the propaganda is, whatever the things are. They're the ones that when I talk to them say, healthcare, of course, good schools, of course, pensions, why not? Why would you be against them? And the trick is, my generation, we're getting old and we are disappearing. And they will once inherit theirs. So I do see a lot of hope over there. And I guess I got to give you 30 seconds to shout out about your blog, because you haven't mentioned that. People need to read Nancy's blog if you want to know about special education, charter schools, testing, anything. She's written about it all for years.
Yeah, I'm not sure how long I'll be doing it. I like quilting an awful lot. I like painting, but no, I really will try to continue as long as I can. I love writing. I love researching, and it's just very exciting for me to just look at these issues and to try to have some kind of impact, as little as it might be. And I love writing projects of any kind. I always have. I love children's literature, though, too. Love picture books. And so I may be working a little bit more on that. I had a picture book that was accepted in 2007, but then they got rid of the editor. I think it was because of Common Core. It was with Dutton. And so I'm going to go back and work a little bit on that. Just on some of the things I like to do, but and just watch to see how things unfold. Like you, I have an adult daughter who, I see great hope in that generation, Jesse. I do think they care deeply about what's going on in the world, and they just kind of skirt over all this political stuff, and they're going to try to make it better. And I think they will, maybe, but they're going to have a lot of stuff they're going to have to fix, I think, when when they kind of arrive at the scene, because I think there are just a lot of problems to overcome now that have been created by people. I'm very concerned about the wealthy, and hopefully something will change to improve what we're doing in our schools and with special ed. I hope we'll still have these programs that will focus on kids and not just tech and collecting data.
We will. Thank you, listeners, for listening to the Truth to Power Hour on 103 FM New Haven.
Something
Thank you,
happened
Jesse.
here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound?